Welcome, everybody. Okay, we're going to get started. So welcome to day three of Black in Neuro Week 2026. My name is Deshane. I'll be your host today. And today is Neuro Racism. So we have our second live event for you all that will be exploring how we preserve our brains in a world that is designed to take them away. So before I explain more about the theme and our speaker today, we have a few announcements. We're just going to cycle through. So firstly, live ASL interpretation is supplied by Vidman Barber, and automatic closed captioning is enabled in this Zoom webinar. So you can choose to view or hide closed captions by clicking the live transcript or show captions button or CC. And if you have any issues accessing these captions, please message the ghost moderator in the chat or in the Q&A. Secondly, we are all joining this talk from around the world. As always with our events, we invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on the lands that you're joining from and your relationship to those lands and to the indigenous peoples who have and continue to inhabit them. So for more information on this, please visit nativeland.ca and please do take the time to do so. And last but not least, we would also love to encourage people to visit our website and to register to become a member of Black in Neuro because it is completely free. Yes, I said free. So if you want to, please visit blackinneuro.com and get set up and you'll join our directory. So with all housekeeping done, let's get straight into it. Today's event is titled Preserving Our Brain Health in a World Designed to Take It Away. And we bring this keynote to you because it is a sure fact that neurological disorders continue to rise globally. Neurological disorders are essentially the second leading cause of death worldwide and the leading cause of disability. And a large proportion of this death and disability can be attributed to dementia-related disorders. Somebody in the world develops dementia every 3 seconds, with 10 million new cases each year. By 2030, it's projected that 78 million people will be living with some form of dementia. By 2050, this will be 139 million. In many of our societies, we are living longer, but not necessarily better. And as Black people who are unfortunately disproportionately affected by dementia-related disorders, such as Alzheimer's, it is imperative that we are able to find ways to fight back. In the US, over 20% of Black Americans aged 70 and older live with Alzheimer's disease. Now, given the racism, the stresses, the highs and lows of our lives, we deserve to age gracefully and with dignity. So this is where our amazing speaker comes in. Dr. Raina Croft is an associate professor at the Oregon Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which is based at Oregon Health and Science University. She received her PhD in anthropology at Yale University. And her work is all about designing culturally celebratory brain health interventions, like her National Institute on Aging funded study, SHARP, which stands for Sharing History Through Active Reminiscence and Photo Imagery. Essentially, SHARP preserves Black health and history through conversational reminiscence, walks which are in gentrified, historically Black neighborhoods. Some of you may have seen this work, which has been highlighted by the Associated Press. She is also the 2024 recipient of the American Academy of Neurology Mid-Career Healthcare Equity Research Award. I'm really excited to hear from you today, Dr. Croft, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I think this Black in Neuro Week, we're just getting started, but it's already been so inspiring, and I'm just thrilled to be a part of it. So I'm going to share my slides. Put that in presenter mode here. Okay. Can everybody see it? Can you confirm? All right, thank you. Yes, I realized I was given a longer title, Preserving Our Brains in a World Trying to Take Away Our Brain Health or something like that. But really what I'm talking about today is preserving us and how we can move from neuroracism to neuroresilience. And so the walk ahead today, we're going to start by talking a little bit about what are the things we can do that preserve us, but really looking at what do we already have going for us that is actively preserving us. And when I say preserving us, I'm talking about our cognition, our ability to have high quality lives and to present as our full selves because we have our full healthy cognition. Then we'll go into the SHARP study, which Dr. Murray already referred to. And then we will take a look at participant reflections and what were participants' thoughts and feelings and the revelations about being in a study that is culturally celebratory and really centering the Black experience and actually decentering brain health. And then we'll take a look at some of the stories that SHARP has curated, as it is an oral history-based program. I got a little excited about all the stories I wanted to share, so we'll see what we can get through today. And then I'd like us to end with some reflection about our future and our terms, meaning what kinds of interventions is it that is attractive to us? And in what ways can what we've learned from this talk today, can we carry that forward in our lives? And at that point, I'm really hoping that that will be the kickoff to conversation, because I'm only going to leave you with a few conclusions. And I really hope that this group comes together to really talk about some conclusions that they have drawn from the talk today. So I want to begin with what we have to celebrate, because we have so much to celebrate. What you see here, this list, these are all cultural factors which are brain healthy protective. They are protective of our brain health. So we have a protective heritage encoded within us. And this list, I'm sure it looks familiar to you. This is really just a reminder. And the next few slides about what we can actually do and examples of keeping our brain health, they're really just going to be a group exercise in remembering what we actually already inherently know. This is a reflection of our internal AI programming, or our ancestral intelligence, to borrow from Dr. King's talk yesterday, which introduced that phrase that she has come familiar with. And ever since I've heard that, I cannot let it go. Our ancestral intelligence. And this is really just a reminder of our cultural blueprint for supporting the natural state of health and well-being that we were born to experience. I think it's so important that we remember that poor health outcomes are not inherent within us. It is not an us-generated problem. Rather, poor health outcomes, the disparities in brain health, the high rates of Alzheimer's disease, and high rates of chronic conditions that are risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, these are the result of systemic inequities. And we do ourselves a great injustice, or anybody who phrases, who says that we have health disparities without referring to the fact that it is an outcome of larger and ongoing historical and systemic equities. That puts the onus on us rather than on the systems that have created those disparities. So it's always important that we contextualize disparities within the larger historical context that created those disparities. But I've already gone on a little tangent here. But really, these poor health outcomes that I said is not an us problem. They are really the result of us living within day-to-day cultural incongruencies, right? In a society that was founded by a completely different set of values than that of our ancestors. When you look at this list here, does it look anything like dogged individualism, or the idea that nuclear families is the cornerstone of American culture, or that our identity is tied to what one can amass? No, this is our cultural heritage right here. These are the cultural values that we have curated over centuries of living in this country. We as a people, we are inherently and ancestrally interdependent, and we have chosen, when possible, to live in extended families, to value our elders, and we have curated a sense of belonging and connection through our faith communities, and curating a strong sense of identity precisely because of our interdependence in all of these various ways. So social connection, all of this is social connection, right? And this has been our survival strategy, and this has all contributed to our resilience. And as we all know, our resilience has been reinforced and re-encoded in us over and over again out of the necessity of the history of this country. So what I want to talk about today, this is where I want to begin, all the things we have going for us. And I'm taking a little bit longer on this slide because this is really framing the intent of the rest of the talk. I think it's so important that we understand that when our starting point, or when we believe our starting point is where so many of the papers and of the talks, including my own in my early career, so many of these papers and talks about brain health in African Americans start with a deficit base. They start with that familiar refrain that African Americans are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than white Americans because of chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, obesity. And while that is certainly important, I don't think it's the place where we need to start. For me, it's like it's like being in school and starting African history lesson or starting an African American history lesson with slavery rather than going back to the complex and interconnected and strong social um, societies that we came from in Africa. To me, when we start the dialogue about Alzheimer's disease and brain health with our deficits, it's very much akin to starting our history in this country as slaves rather than looking at the full greater story. So this simply is not our whole story. And it's not motivating, and it doesn't create a sense of agency either. And so that's why I develop culturally celebratory brain health programming. I start with asset-based. I start with those cultural heritage that's the factors that is encoded within us that protects our brain health. And so I know that so many of us, if you're familiar with brain health and health disparities regarding Alzheimer's disease, um, there's a lot of literature around what exactly is the cause of those disparities and the extent of those disparities. And it is important that we understand that. There is definitely a place for that conversation. And there is definitely a place for us to compare our health to the health of white Americans, because we need to know where we stand in relation to the group that has the greatest access to health care and who has the greatest privileges in the society to support the greatest level of health. That's important. But I still don't think we need to start there. I think we can start with our strengths. And so I'm going to start with a few examples of where we do have better health outcomes when it comes to brain health. So yes, there is more Alzheimer's disease prevalence among Black Americans, but we have a slower rate of cognitive decline than white Americans. And this means we may live longer at various stages of decline. We may have a longer span within the mild cognitive impairment phase or within early stage dementia phase. This is sort of like good and not so good news because um, it takes a lot more years of care, and we know that family caregivers can experience stress and even more severe outcomes than the people they are caring for. They can decline faster than the people they're caring for. So this is sort of a mixed bag. Obviously, we want our elders to live as long as possible. So I'm seeing this as a better outcome with an understanding of the time and care it does mean for caregivers, as well as the financial, as well as what that means financially. But let me move on. We also know that older Black adults show fewer plaques or beta amyloid in the brain. And these are protein buildups that are a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. And so we have show fewer plaques in the brain compared to whites of similar cognitive status. And also, when there are physical changes within our brains overall, our cognitive performance remains relatively high. And so we may have structural changes that indicate cognitive decline, but behaviorally, they are not expressed as strongly as in white Americans. And so this is a nod to our cognitive resilience. Another better outcome or good outcome for us is that the gene variant APOE4, its impact on Alzheimer's disease risk is attenuated in African history. It has less of an effect in Black Americans than in white Americans. And finally, and there are others, these are just the ones I want to show you today. Positive affect, so having a positive outlook on life, having positive emotions among Black Americans. This is a really strong predictor of higher executive functioning in Black Americans, but it's not so true in white Americans. Positive affect isn't as strong as a predictor for cognitive functioning in white Americans. So these are just a few of the ways in which we exhibit strong cognitive health and, in fact, better health outcomes than whites in many cases. So that's what I want to focus on. I want to focus on our cultural heritage of interdependence and being social. This idea that I am because we are. This comes from the Ubuntu philosophy. And this idea that we cannot be human alone. So I'm going to share in the next few slides a couple of studies that really indicate how being socially engaged, being physically active, and being connected through reminiscence, because that's the area that I study, how those contribute to our brain health. So in this particular study, this was done by a mentor of mine, and I was part of the study. There were 83 participants, and the average age was 80, and they had no dementia, and they engaged in daily 30-minute online social interactions over 6 weeks. And what they found was they had improved language-based executive functions. So this is planning and focus and ability to do multiple tasks at once. And this was true among healthy and cognitively impaired older adults, and their psychomotor speeds, the hand-eye coordination, was particularly improved among those with mild cognitive impairment. And we also know that having stimulating activities, particularly social activities late in life, slows cognitive decline or presents less cognitive decline in brain function. So this study had 1,929 cognitively normal participants. They were 70 years and over. They were followed for 4 years. And what they found was that those who engaged in computer use, so kudos to all of us right now who are on the computer, those who engaged in more computer use, crafts, particularly social activities, and playing games, had significant decreased risk of new onset mild cognitive impairment. And this is important because mild cognitive impairment is often a precursor. It's often the preclinical stage for Alzheimer's disease. So I also want to just cue you into, you'll see a lot of historical images here. And all of these images that you see are images that we actually use in our study. I'll be talking about the SHARP study coming up. But this is a very visual presentation because my work is very visual. We use historical images as prompts to help people to be socially engaged and to be able to talk about their lives together. So what is the connection between brain health and being social? Why is it so important that we remain social, that we practice this idea that we cannot be human alone, that I am because we are? Well, we know that being social counters depression, anxiety, loneliness, and isolation. Okay, and these are all major risk factors for cognitive decline. And if you think about it, it makes sense. When you're depressed, you're not as likely to go out and engage with people. So you have less stimulation coming into your brain because you're not having these conversations, and you're exercising your brain less because you're not engaging in that interaction and all the cognitive functions that are engaged when you are interacting with another human being. We know that larger social networks are protective against dementia, depression, and stress. And on average, African Americans tend to have larger social networks because of that cultural value of interdependence and large family networks. Depression and stress in older Black adults is linked to a more rapid declines in global cognition. And I think I've already mentioned this, but the value of being social is that we are exercising so many different aspects of our brain health when we are engaged with another human being, right? We have to focus our attention, our working memory, our executive functions, organizing our thoughts. When someone speaks to us and tells us a moving story, we have to respond with emotional intelligence, and we have to come up with the right words to describe how we feel and come up with our responses. There's so much there to keep our brains sharp and connected. And furthermore, being social supports successful aging in place. I think we all want to age in place. We all want to be able to grow old in our homes, in our neighborhoods, and being social allows us to do that because we can develop that trust with our neighbors. We can develop that stronger network with our families and friends so that when we need that extra care, they are there and we already have those networks in place. So this was a study I was a part of. This was run by Dr. Jeffrey Proul, and we wanted to take mindfulness-based practices and adapt them to something that feels culturally familiar to African American women in gentrified areas. Well, in particular in Portland, and within the gentrifying area of our Albina district, which is a historically Black neighborhood, and you'll learn a lot more about that in some coming slides. And so what this study did, now we're talking about mindfulness-based stress reduction, which may seem the opposite of being social. But in order to show up in a social situation and to truly connect with another human being, we need to continually practice being comfortable in ourselves and having a, a, a base sense of mindfulness and presence. And there's a lot of work out there, as we all know, about the value of mindfulness and its effect on cognition. And I'm just going to briefly describe a little bit of the outcomes of this study. So this was a 4-week study with 10 older African-American women, like I said, living in a gentrified neighborhood. They were aged 50 to 89, and they practiced meditation and light yoga about 15 to 45 minutes at home, and this was guided. Well, first we had focus groups about what are the sources of stress. And probably not surprising, the sources of stress included being surveyed in stores, being followed, being ignored by customers. And I want to contextualize this a little bit. I'm coming to you from Portland, Oregon. We're about 6-7% African American here, and we're about 2% in the state. So it is not an uncommon practice to go anywhere in Portland and be among the only or one of very few Black folks. And so some of the other experiences that people described in terms of stressors was this constant sense of cultural incongruence, right? I talked about earlier how this country was largely formed on values that are culturally incongruent to some of the values that we have curated over centuries, like that dogged individualism, the idea that the nuclear family is most important rather than the extended family, and that our identity is attached to what we can produce or what we have accomplished. And so some of the cultural incongruences experienced by these women included shifting generational and demographic norms when living in a gentrified neighborhood and not being addressed properly as they feel they should be as an older adult. And this feeling of not being able to really fully express themselves because they would be labeled as aggressive. And I could go on and on with this list that is probably familiar to all of us. So with the intervention with the mindfulness, what we found was that individuals developed a sense of remembering their core self, remembering or being able to remain in one's element so that they could process confrontations and stress in a way that would minimize reactionary responses. Because reactionary responses can often just cause more stress and it becomes this cyclical negative social interaction rather than, well, I'm not saying it's not going to be a negative social interaction when you are confronted with something that feels, let's just say racist, but the ability to control how you process that and internalize that, I think, is what's important here. Individuals described finding strength and faith in family. And they described recognition of the need for taking time out and caring for oneself, cultivating self-love despite circumstances. So a lot of my work is around reminiscence, particularly group reminiscence. And this is another way to remember your core self. It's also another way to be socially engaged. And So this study was an 8-week life review reminiscence intervention with healthy older Black Americans. And this, so they would, this were, what did I say? This was life review. Okay, so that means they were looking at some of the major milestones in their lives, and they were discussing this together regularly. They had this thing to look forward to where they could discuss, what their teen years were like, what their early work years were like, and really have that time to process changes in life and to reflect upon what stage in life they're on now. And this kind of intervention, or this one in particular, but generally these kinds of interventions have really high retention rates. And what this tells me is that this is something that is of interest to us. This is something that sustains our interest. And that's important because interventions that are attractive to us and that sustain our interest are more likely to have better health outcomes because it's something we're practicing regularly. So this study in particular had a significant decline in depression. And just remember that is so important because depression is a major risk factor for cognitive decline because of the effect it has on us becoming antisocial. So my work is also about physical activity and the importance of that for maintaining our brain health. And so this is a picture of me. This was probably taken, what, it was about 2 weeks ago now. I recently joined a dance troupe here in Portland, Portland Samba. It's an Afro-Brazilian dance troupe. We march in parades. And I tell you, this is right now, this feels like the number one thing that I can be doing for my brain. It's social. It has expanded my social network. I'm dancing with other women who are my age and into their 70s, which gives me a sense of vitality and an outlook on life that there is so much more I can do. And there is a long lifespan in which I can stay active. I have to remember choreography, which is brain work. And I'm just enjoying myself. I'm being physical and I'm being social. And I keep my appointment every Saturday for our rehearsals. It is an appointment for my health. And that is time for me. So I wanted to just highlight this study coming out of Rutgers that looked at 32 African Americans aged 60 and over, and they were matched with 32 no contact controls. So these controls didn't do anything. They were the controls. And the 32 active individuals engaged in 5 months of cardio and dance. And they took a series of neuropsychological tests. And they found that, or these were tests that looked at their attention, executive function, so planning, organizing, their memory. And then there was self-report depression. And not surprisingly, this study found significant improvements in depression. And they found improved executive function and attention, and particularly strong findings among poor sleepers and those who were experiencing obesity. So physical activity is wonderful, but if you can find a social physical activity, that is even better because they keep you accountable for showing up and you have that thing to look forward to because you're connecting with other people. That idea that we cannot be human alone. Okay, so this is where most talks and papers usually start, which is with the brain health disparities. But I think this is appropriately seated farther into the talk so that we could have set the stage for all the wonderful things we have going for us, for those inherent things that our culture naturally supports because it's been part of our culture for so long. So African Americans do have disparate rates of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease because of disparate rates of chronic conditions, diabetes, hypertension. And remember, because this is the result of ongoing and historic inequities. Again, it's very important we say that to place the onus on the systems that create these disparities and not on the individuals, as if individuals were just making poor choices because they're lazy. We need to make sure we're putting the onus where the onus is deserved. Yet, even though African Americans have higher rates of cognitive decline, we have a lower perceived risk of cognitive decline, less knowledge of cognitive decline and of Alzheimer's disease, less concern, maybe because there's less knowledge of it, and less likelihood to seek early care. And I believe this really has to do with less access to quality, culturally engaging health information, care, and interventions. So I'm going to share a little bit about what a culturally engaging intervention looks like and its impact on our brain health. And that is called the SHARP study. SHARP stands for Sharing History Through Active Reminiscence and Photo Imagery. It's not a memory test. You can just remember SHARP. So first of all, SHARP operates on three principles. This is a study I developed in 2016, coming out of my history of being first an archaeologist of the African diaspora and being fascinated by history and stories. Well, let me get to our three principles. SHARP operates on this. One, Black culture is to be celebrated. Period. It's just to be celebrated. Two, we honor our health and history for better outcomes. When we integrate our health with our history, we are attaching ourselves to a long line of resilience and change makers and people who paved a way so that we could experience health well into our older years, and so that we can be part of this longer, larger unfolding story of history and health and vitality. Oops. And number three is prioritizing acid-based celebratory narratives over comparison to white health and our myriad health deficits compared to white health is more motivating, and it is more likely to keep people engaged and to curate a sense of agency around people taking charge of their own health and seeing what they already have going for them that they can enhance. So originally I want to talk about placemaking in neuroscience. I had a lot of ideas that I wanted to share with this group, and I've had to narrow it down. But I did leave this slide in because placemaking is people. This is the team that I have intentionally curated over the years. A part of SHARP, I should put it up as number 4 principle. Part of SHARP is always engaging emerging scholars of color at every level of the research. And this has been a win-win for our interns and our research staff, as well as for our participants, because they see each other as sharing in each other's success. Okay, the SHARP study. So what is it? So SHARP is essentially a neighborhood walking program. It takes place in gentrifying neighborhoods. It started in Portland, but it has expanded to Seattle. In fact, they are walking right now. And we are beginning in Oakland. We haven't tested routes there yet, but Seattle, Portland, and Oakland all have similar histories of gentrifying neighborhoods, probably similar, or I would say not probably, similar to many cities across the US. And so what participants do is they walk in groups of threes, 3 times a week. They walk 1 mile pre-designed routes, and these routes are themed. So this route, for example, might be school days, and they walk past the school where the picture took place, or where the picture signifies something like that could have taken place. It's not always the exact place. And what this is people are talking and remembering, they're prompted by the images, they're sharing stories, and they're engaged with one another. But this is brain health. The brain health is actually operating in the background. And what is front and center is people's lived experiences, their stories, and their connection to place. And so why gentrifying neighborhoods? Well, you can see in Portland, where I was born and raised, Portland's Black population was essentially cut in half between 2000 and 2010, from some 13,000 to some 7,000. Similarly, in Seattle, Seattle's Central District was 75% Black in the 70s. Now it's 15% Black, or that was in 2020. Oakland, similar story, 47% Black in 1980s. at 20% Black as of 2022. And so these are disappearing communities. And there is a real sense of urgency to not only preserve one's health as one gets older, but preserve their history and their lived experiences. And these lived experiences take place in these neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods are changing rapidly. And so with gentrification, long-term Black residents largely view gentrification-oriented retail spaces as exclusionary and culturally incongruent. And we know that living with cultural incongruency is living with a constant embodied state of stress. It's not quite aligned with who we are. Now, Black gentrification is a thing, and Black gentrification tends to preserve the character of a neighborhood because Black gentrifiers invest in established Black-owned businesses, and they contribute to the character of the neighborhood, while white gentrification tends to erase and completely replace Black-owned businesses. So there is a difference there. And as a neighborhood gentrifies, racial discrimination toward long-term residents of color increases, above average stress for long-term residents of color increases, and preparation for bias behavior among residents of color increases. And what is that if you're not familiar with it? That sense that you're putting on a shield or a guard, that you have to dress up nicer, that you have to make sure that you're not walking in some place with a big backpack so that you won't be more likely to be followed, or being ready to defend yourself when you're about to make a return. All of this preparation for bias behavior is stress that we hold in our body because we have to present ourselves as something that is other than who we are. And displacement and erasure of Black businesses and spaces that foster that sense of belonging increases as well. So for Portland's Albina district, gentrification has been going on and displacement for decades. What you see here is a picture of community folks protesting the building of Emmanuel Hospital, which displaced many people from their homes. They were given pennies for their homes. And what you see at the bottom here is a home where it's been purchased and it's been renovated, and it's just sort of that unfolding scene of gentrification represented in this one house right here. So gentrification can decrease a desire to engage in neighborhood walking, right? If you don't feel a sense of belonging and at home in your neighborhood, you might not be as likely to go out and engage, have impromptu social engagement with folks. And we know that walking and social engagement is so important for our brain health. Older Black adults perceive their gentrifying neighborhoods as less socially cohesive, and this is critical because social cohesion has significantly predicted neighborhood walking and positive affect. And then finally, neighborhood walking strengthens the social environment because people are out and about. They're able to connect with people they see on the street. They're able to become familiar with businesses and maybe the people that frequent those businesses. And group walking among older adults actually reduces psychological distress and improves social support. So all of this is sort of the basis of the SHARP study and why it is designed as a walking study within gentrifying neighborhoods. And so one thing when we think about this erasure of neighborhoods and the loss of neighborhoods and its connection to brain health, Davidson and Lees ask us to have a phenomenological lens when understanding gentrified spaces. And they call this structures of feeling, okay? And that there are emotional geographies of bereavement associated with displacement. I mean, think about it. Imagine going to your old neighborhood and your favorite corner store or the playground you used to frequent, and it's gone. You're going to have an emotion. You're going to have, this is going to be part of your emotional geography, those places that you frequented and had impact or meaning on your life. And so I think it's neat to think of structures, buildings, but to think of them as structures of feelings and how we relate to them. And Gibbons and Barton actually say that the subtle effects of cultural displacement rather than physical displacement may be more detrimental to health, particularly for low-income residents of color. So, SHARP, the walking study, it is multimodal, meaning it's walking, it's social engagement, it's reminiscence, and it's these proven modalities for brain health. And its aim is to maintain or improve cognitive function by increasing physical, social, and reminiscence activity in a way that celebrates the culture, vitality, and history of Black people, and that creates a tangible community deliverable, a digital oral history archive. So participants have a tablet device, and only one, because we don't want everyone to be on their tablets. And there are a series of themed walks. They log in, and the app will buzz at 3 points along the route. A memory marker will pop up. And the memory markers look like this. So a memory marker could be in front of an actual building. So they're looking at what is and thinking about what was, or it could be just about Black life and culture in the neighborhood, particularly between 1940 and 2010, because that is the period of time in which Black folks came to Portland, were redlined within the Albina district and came to really thrive, and then experienced displacement. So we have a number of walk themes, and the route will turn blue as one progresses along the route. And all the routes are about 1 mile and start and end at the same place. I'm going to skip this slide because I want to get to some of the other parts. So we had to curate first to develop these walks. We had to excavate the archives and really look for stories about our people, places, and events. And we did not operate on the assumptions of the researchers. We held community focus groups, and we learned from the community what it was that they wanted featured in walking routes. Here are some examples from the rich archival collections for the Albina district in Portland. And here are some for the Central District. And I think the funnest thing for me is coordinating these pictures into themes to create themed routes. And that in itself could be a wonderful intervention to do with community. But right now it's the research team that is doing that. And so these are the memory markers that we have created. These serve as conversational prompts for the triads as they walk. And some of these photos were donated by research participants, and some of them have research participants in the photos. And you can see one right now with her two nieces. Okay, here are some examples of memory markers in Seattle. We have about 36 routes total in Seattle now, and we have 86 routes for Portland now. So I'll just read one example here. So housing and neighborhoods route. What impact do you think integrated public housing has had on Black communities? And what was housing access like when you lived in the Central District? So the first question is really history-based, and the second question is really opinion, so everyone can engage in conversation, even if they're not able to answer some of the historical facts or are familiar with that particular place that's featured. So here's what a route looks like that's one continuous theme. This is arts and entertainment. And you can see that it spans from 1944 all the way through 2007. And this is an example of Oakland routes. And I am really looking forward to testing these routes. So was there an impact on health from walking 3 times a week for 6 months? So we've done several pilots. I'm going to be focusing on the first 2 pilots in Portland. So in Portland, for pilot 1 and 2, we had 40 individuals. Folks were aged around 65, 69. Most were female, most were single. We found that folks with mild cognitive impairment had less education, and most people were unemployed in our first cohort, and in our second cohort, most people were employed. So the retention rate was very high, 74 and 86%, which tells us that this is something of interest to people, that this is attractive, that this idea of preserving our health and our history is something that older adults want to be engaged in and has meaning for them. Because walking 3 times a week for 6 months is a commitment. So we looked at the Montreal Cognitive Assessment at baseline and end study, as well as other measures. And so we found that MoCA remained, so the cognitive assessment or the cognitive functioning, according to this 30-point brief assessment, cognition was relatively stable for healthy individuals. We have folks who are healthy, folks who have mild cognitive impairment, and in our later pilots, we have people who have early stage dementia. But for these pilots, it was people who had healthy cognition and who had mild cognitive impairment. And we found that cognitive function or their MoCA scores improved particularly for people with mild cognitive impairment. And overall, 67% of the sample maintained or improved their cognitive function at the end of walking and talking and reminiscing together for 6 months. And blood pressure improved overall. And in fact, the average MoCA score improvement was statistically significant. So I know the numbers are small here, but the main outcomes, the summary is here on the side. So in terms of self-report, we found that health ratings improved for cohort. Well, I'm being very detailed. I tend to do that. Overall, largely health ratings improved. More people at the end of the study rated their health as being very or fairly active. Energy levels increased. See, in a lot of cases, these levels either increased or maintained, which is good because it means things are not decreasing. And this is over 6 months. So it's really more of a promising signal of efficacy if this were to be maintained longer term. Energy levels largely increased or were maintained. Days feeling peaceful or calm in the last 4 weeks of walking was largely maintained. And days feeling downhearted or blue actually did increase, but only slightly, which isn't surprising because people are walking through and experiencing neighborhood loss and processing that together. But later on, we'll talk about the overall feeling of healing from the trauma of gentrification. Mood improved right after group walking and since walks began. And this is really important because we've talked about mood and depression and its impact on limiting our desire to be socially engaged. And finally, 192% respectively in both cohorts were extremely likely to recommend SHARP to friends and family. So we know we're definitely on to something that is adoptable and scalable, much wider than these 3 cities. So we did another pilot where we measured sleep and we measured step count, not just while they were walking, but continuously. And we compared those with mild cognitive impairment with those who were healthy. This was a very small study, just 9 individuals. But we found that even though people with mild cognitive impairment, which is more memory loss than is normal for their age, they self-reported being very active, but they actually had less, almost half the step count of people who were healthy. They also had less sleep, and they took a lot longer to respond to a weekly health survey. So I thought that was interesting to note. We don't know if a lifetime of being less physically active contributed to mild cognitive impairment, or if less physical activity ensued once one was mildly cognitively impaired. But overall, the takeaway is to remain active and find social ways to do that. For SHARP Seattle, we had 31 walkers, and they walked for just 4 weeks. It was really to get the thing off the ground. And again, most folks were female. And this is, again, a highly educated group. Most people having master's and above or bachelor's degrees at least. And so even though it was 4 weeks, we found that there was also better mean self-rated health at the end of walks and fewer depressive symptoms. And so participant reflections, this is the part that really digs into the meaningfulness of this. Because health outcomes are great, but if this is going to be something that people engage in long-term and make a lifestyle, it really has to have a really profound internal meaning. So for Seattle, people really valued seeing the community, but also being seen in the community. That being seen was a form of activism in itself, particularly in a gentrifying neighborhood where people are seeing less and less of themselves, particularly less and less of older Black adults out and about walking in the neighborhood. They enjoyed the generational perspectives that these walks bring when they're paired with either within their own group having different generations, but also when our research team, we don't walk with them. We only walk with them the first 3 walks to make sure they've got it. And so those conversations, that intergenerational perspective is really interesting. And so I want to go into some of the thoughts that they shared in focus groups. This person says, it's just like when we went up on Madison. It's like the Safeway store. I'm telling her that this is where the Mardi Gras was, you know? This is where Birdland was. And across the street, this is where I'm sorry, this is where this was. And up the street, Jimmy's Cafe, those places aren't there anymore. And so it's kind of hard. Yes, the history is not out there on the street. The history is in the books or in your mind, or you've lived it. This person in their processing, they say, I had the benefit of growing up and my community was all Black, right? My preschool was Black. And then going into schools where I wasn't in an all Black setting and how I felt that difference, you know? I think that's so important. Our community has been gentrified, but we can still stay connected through the history. And so it's very important that it's recorded and that people can experience that. This picture is a picture of Black students in Seattle being bused into white districts. I think we all know how that went. This other person says, I was just trying to walk and get some exercise, but personally, I got more out of it than I intended to. That's why I was telling her that I felt like I've hibernated for many years and just woke up during these walks. So in Portland, well, as in both groups, people reflected on how being in the program inspired more physical activity outside the program. For example, this person says, I'm like sparked after we finished after I'm sparked. I'm like, I need a theatrical reader here beside me. I'm like sparked after we finished walking. I get home, I'm cleaning, organizing, you know, putting my dinner on for a couple days. And like me keeping an appointment for my dance, this person says, now I know I have something to do on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And when I talk to my son on the phone, he says, I know about your walks, Mama. I know you're going to go on your walk. So people are really carving out this time of self-care. Being in the study also increased social activity outside the study. This person really reflects on just bonding with our Black folks, the communication piece with other Black folks that's in the neighborhood. And that's what I was wanting. And if it wasn't for this program, I wouldn't know about these other activities that is going on in the community, getting a chance to meet you guys, get involved in other activities and stuff. So people were expanding their social networks and learning about more things to attend and go to, and they had people now that they could go with. How did people perceive the impact on their cognitive function? Well, remember, brain health was really working in the background. It was really the human connection and the lived experiences that was front and center, the preservation of those historical neighborhood community memories. But this person says, I think it's made me address issues with memory that are caused by not being as healthy as I need to be. I can't say I've noticed any improvement in memory, but my health is improving because of the walks, because of what it takes to walk. So other individuals reported making an appointment for the first time with their neurologist or with their general practitioner to talk about memory and be more engaged in the care of their health. Now, I mentioned earlier about some increase in days feeling sad or downhearted. And we don't want this to be the sad study, of course, but obviously this is a sad thing when you're walking through a community that that is not as it was, and you're aging in this community, and your neighbors that you depend on and have known maybe intergenerationally are leaving, or maybe you've had to leave yourself. But people have found that walking together really was the medicine, that taking the time to slow down and process with other people was really what helped them to face the trauma of gentrification and literally walk through it. This person says, it made me walk past my mother's house, and I had not done that since she passed away. My walking partner said, come on, come on. Then I started talking about all the changes and the people that lived in the community and what they did at that time. But it was part of my growing, and I had to do it. And this person says, you know, my husband said to me one day when I was coming home after the walk, are you sure you still want to do this? You get so angry. And I said, yeah, I'm sure. As I tried to tell him, it's an opportunity for me to express myself with people who understand exactly my experience, exactly what I am feeling. So her husband happened to be white, by the way. And then for a final reflection, um, this person says, it's like the older community are the storytellers. So when you come in and buy up that property or move those persons out, you have no one to relate those stories to. So young people are kind of like, okay, that happened back in the day, but I've taken from listening to my children. And even though they're all, adults themselves, they remember those stories that I told them, but the landmarks are gone. So it was refreshed in their mind when they were maybe like 10 years old. Oh, I remember where that house was, but the stories around it have disappeared because the older generations, what is there to talk about? Who knows that? And another person steps in and says, who can relate to my stories? And it turns out that a lot of people can relate to these stories. And so we've taken these stories and we have created staged readings and theatrical plays from these stories to engage a larger audience in conversations about brain health and about aging in place, about gentrification, and about displacement. And so we have professional actors who are reading these stories, and we have a sharp participant who's there in the middle. And we've done this twice now with a different participant. And so it's a really full circle for this particular participant because they have engaged in several iterations of Sharp, and now they are presenting theirs and others as an actor on stage. Here's another picture. So we project images and we have era music, and the script almost wrote itself. It was basically verbatim stories from the Sharp study. And the plot was three people walking in a research study. Okay, there could be some work on the plot, but really the focus was the stories. And this is something that can be replicated elsewhere because it is really that simple. And so here are some of the stories that we highlighted. We called them rent parties. It was a basement party off of Williams and San Rafael. People seriously needed money. So they would put on parties each week, and you pay a quarter to get in, charge you 50 cents a quarter. They didn't serve food, but they would have Kool-Aid. I fought in every movement. I moved to Berkeley, California to be part of the movement. Joined up with Miss Angela Davis and the Black Panthers, I did. Trouble. I was like, I got to get in this. Didn't get arrested, ain't been to no jail. And I worked with the children's breakfast program with Elaine because she was running it and just got involved. Went to meetings, but I never held a gun and never been in no jail. Mama's voice was back there. Don't you cross that line and don't you embarrass me. I don't want to see your name on no news. The stories spanned various eras of life from childhood to raising grandchildren. And this one focuses on those going out years. Paul's Paradise, then the Cotton Club, then the Elks, See, we had a route in the area, in the Air Force. There was an all-night grocery store called Frankie's on 27th and Columbia Boulevard. Then we'd go down to Vancouver. First, we hit Van's Olympic Room at Vancouver and Fremont, then the Gay Paris, which is at Russell and Vancouver. Then we would go to the Cotton Club at Vancouver and Tillamook Streets. Then we'd take a left and go to the Elks. All in one night. This person is reflecting on her father and how they were all barbers, but the barbers would close their shop on Monday so they could all go out and go golfing because they were all golfers, believe it or not. Yes, they were all golfers. Portland had a huge golfing community. I think it was called Leisure Hour. Okay, right. So yeah, it was big. My dad actually said, so I'm just letting you know, if I'm going to die, that's the way to do it on the golf course. He just won 9 holes and he sat down quietly, and that was the end. So they said he died happy. So what is it that we're doing on stage with these stories and with the audience? Well, it turns out oral history is brain health, right? And oral history on stage is neuroscience. The walkers, we've already gone over the health benefits of the walkers. For the audience watching these stories, seeing the images projected and hearing the era music, they are practicing a form of adjacent reminiscence therapy where these stories spark stories in themselves. It might not be the same events, but they are remembering the same human emotions, the same similar circumstances, and they are reflecting upon their own memories. And they may be reflecting maybe on the privilege, if they're of a privileged group, of how they can go back to their neighborhood home and it is still there, or their neighborhood um, uh, foundational landmarks and it's still there. Or maybe they're questioning what is their role in gentrification, or how might they be able to go forward and age healthfully. So there's this deep emotional processing that is happening as we listen to emotional stories. And emotions enhance learning. Whenever there is an emotion attached to something we hear, that is more deeply encoded in our brains. Now, what about the actors on stage? They're also practicing a form of adjacent reminiscence therapy. Hearing these stories when we were in rehearsals, we would start going into, our own reminiscence sessions about the first concert that they went to, or, the first job that they had, how this reminded them of experiences of their own life. And so we know that acting interventions, which I hope to turn this into an intervention at some point, acting interventions with older adults improves memory, executive function, problem solving. There's so many wonderful studies out there and ways to practice neuroscience in a way that's attractive and centering our stories at the same time, improving our brain health. And so a little bit more, this is a frontier area for me, and I'm really excited to be learning about this. So I'm really trying to understand what is happening with these emotional stories and learning. And oral history-based theater, it's meaningful, it's a visceral experience on stage. It gives people an opportunity to be in conversation or to process change, as well as processing change, not just in their lives, but in their neighborhood and with their own aging and cognition. And it's emotionally meaningful content, and it encourages deeper cognitive processing. So, like I said, this is frontier knowledge for me. This is what I am actively learning. And maybe I'm learning at a deeper level because I grew up in these neighborhoods, so there is emotion attached to it. So maybe I'm learning at a faster rate than if this did not remind me of my own life experiences. But this emotionally meaningful content encourages deeper cognitive processing, where new information is actually mapped onto prior knowledge and personal experiences. So there's already somewhat of an anchor or of a pathway for these stories to be mapped onto. So it's not new information with no context, which is why we can process it at a deeper level neurologically. Um, Seeing stories on stage reflects another's experiences back to us as the audience. It reminds us of our common humanity and our vulnerability. And another thing that fascinates me is this idea that, memories that mirror. So new experiences that mirror or remind one of a previous experience are more deeply encoded. And this is called, in our brains, more deeply encoded. And this is called relational bonding. And so that's the feeling you get when you say, wow, that really touched something in me. That something is something that is already encoded in you. And this is related to that. And so it has a place in your brain, in your network, in your pathways to kind of stick to. And like I said, I don't understand exactly how this works, but I know there is definitely something to having our stories mirrored back to us on stage, whether they are our actual stories verbatim or reminders of our common human experiences. And so these emotional stories, these are stories that stick. So brain regions that are responsible for empathy, which is the amygdala, and for memory, the hippocampus, these regions overlap in the brain so that emotion, which is evoked through empathy, can more deeply encode a memory. And so emotional stories, which is information, tells the brain, pay attention, this is important, and remember it. Emotional stimuli automatically capture attention, and this is the key to learning. And I think that's why oral history and storytelling has been a foundational feature of, I mean, not just us, but of cultures around the world, because that is how we learn about each other, about our world, and that is how we learn about our place in the world and the things we need to know to survive. And so I am wrapping up here because I can't wait to get to our discussion. And so there is cognitive benefit in attending live performances. Um, this study here was in Chicago. It looked at over 5,000 participants, nearly 4,000 of which were African Americans, aged average 72. And they asked, in the past 10 years, how many times have you attended a concert, a play, or a musical? And then there was 3-year follow-up. And so they found those that had frequent attendance. Okay, so the lines that I've highlighted here we're just looking at African Americans. The other 2 lines I have not highlighted are white Americans. But those with more frequent attendance had a greater association with slower cognitive decline in their composite cognitive function. And those who saw 10 or more performances per year were associated with a 23% slower cognitive decline versus those who never attended. They had slower decline in tests of perceptual speed, episodic memory, and in cognitive assessment, the MMSE. And so you can see here the rate of decline. So you see at baseline year 0 is their baseline cognition, and they have a slower or a less steep line of decline for those who attended frequent live performances compared to those who attended none. And so our future, our terms, I just have a few conclusions, and I'm still forming conclusions in my mind. And I'm sure I'll have conclusions based on what you all bring up. But interventions that center and celebrate us preserve us. Sharp centers cultural celebration rather than gentrification. It utilizes the landscape of gentrification for connection rather than disconnection. Sharp centers memory rather than memory loss. And this really supports and celebrates the expression of Black culture rather than suppressing it. Sharp centers on memory health and aging rather than on cognitive decline. And this is what I think really supports attitudes of agency, is highlighting our assets and our benefits. And agency really is the first step to action. I would say agency and finding a study that is attractive to you because it centers your life experiences, your culture and history. Asset-based narratives not only complete our story, they anchor it, right? It's the idea of not starting with our history in this country as slaves, but taking as enslaved individuals, but looking at the fuller picture, not starting with our status of cognitive decline as being twice as likely as white Americans, but starting with our encoded cultural protective heritage. Racism is embodied and it does affect brain health, neuroracism, but we are encoded with resilience because we are encoded with our culture. And finally, interdependence, social connection. This is our ancestral legacy and it's our cultural blueprint for brain health. So that is the conclusion of my talk. You'll have access to these slides later. You can see my contact information. We do have a job opening for a faculty neurologist at Oregon Health and Science University, and I just want to make sure everybody was aware of that. All right. Thank you
you
very much.
so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Croft, for your talk. It's really insightful. There's so much I don't even know really where to start, but I'll probably start with a question and we'll go into the chat because there's a few already. But a clear theme from your presentation was about interdependence. So essentially along those lines, are there ways for the families of your participants, or I guess by extension, maybe carers for those that might have like mild cognitive impairment to get involved with the research? Because I really, what I've seen even just from a personal note, that it's so important that a lot of these interventions are done in a communal way.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, these stories are part of a digital oral history archive, which can be accessed by the community how they see fit. So these can be part of curriculum in schools, or these can be walks that people go on together, and the children could, children or adult children could discuss their stories and compare with the folks they're walking with. So in our caregiver study, which I didn't feature here, it was age 45 and up. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was aged 18 and up. So the caregiver had to be 45 and over, and the person living with dementia had to be 45 or over, but the care support person could be 18 or over, and actually of any race. But we only had Black folks that enrolled. And so, yeah, there are certainly ways to make this intergenerational. I think that would only strengthen the intervention.
I guess in line with that question, there's a question in the chat. Um, and it's okay if you haven't yet looked at the results of the study, but essentially the question is, if you were to repeat this study in a younger Black population, do you think walking would have a reduction in their MCOA scores?
Well, there's more room to improve for those who are already cognitively impaired. So they're more likely to have higher scores because there's more room to improve. If you're already scoring at top as a young person, you might not see changes in your scores, but you will see. I mean, I can't promise anything, but it's highly likely that if you engage in regular social walking, you will see improvements in depression, loneliness, isolation. I mean, it's exercise, it's connectivity, and you have something to look forward to. I think that's important to develop a regular routine and have people that you're looking forward to seeing and who will check on you when you are not there, or who will say, it's just a little bit of rain. Come on. We had folks in our study saying, these folks got me walking in the rain, and I never used to walk in the rain. So the desire to be with other people supersedes the desire to, I don't know, protect our hair out in the rain. Like that's how important these walks have become. And when people couldn't do the walks because of forest fire smoke or icy conditions, they were missing it. They said they had become addicted to these walks. And I think the same would be true for younger folks. I think we need to do more social connection as younger folks.
Thank you so much. Another question I had was, so you talked about, your research and even just like the framework that you've gone about and how you design things, which is super thoughtful. But have you received any pushback to this style of research? And I would guess that's because you're kind of taking from a lot of different themes in different areas. You have your anthropological lens, you have the neuroscience lens as well. So has there been a bit of pushback to this style of research, or has it been well
Uh,
received?
yeah, in my own career, in the beginning, when I had this idea, I was told maybe I should just stick to teaching Black history or Black studies. I was teaching Black studies at Portland State University, and a person the in a health institution, I guess, didn't have the vision or the imagination for something like this being a health intervention. But somebody else in that institution met me with open arms and just kept saying, why not? In fact, take your pictures and your laminated pictures idea and let's make an app out of it. So there has been that pushback to the concept. That was a long time ago. This has been going on for 10 years. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but so there was some pushback there. Let's see, is there other pushback? Uh, people have people, not participants, but other researchers have said, maybe there should be a psychologist available for people to help them process, um, you know,
Mhm.
some of these painful memories when thinking about erasure and community loss. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. That's it.
Thank you so much and for being candid too. So another question in the chat, I think this is from Betty, has asked, what advice would you give to neuroscience researchers who want to broaden the questions they ask by incorporating anthropological perspectives into their work?
Um, Oh, find a champion mentor. That's the first thing. Find somebody who will champion your ideas, or maybe they'll work with you with your ideas. If your ideas are way out there, maybe they'll take the core piece of it that interests you and work with you to make that into something that can be funded or that can actually, be functional and happen. With my idea, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything about apps. I came in with a PowerPoint showing how I'd like an app to look, and I had photos that I thought, well, if it's raining, we can laminate them. But I had a champion mentor who said, not only is this a good idea, it's an innovative and needed idea, and we think that this could be this or similar studies that center the lived experience of Black people could be the antidote to brain health clinical trials that are 95% white in this country. We've been labeled a hard to reach population. Other populations have been labeled that, but all of us in this room, we know that we're not hard to reach. It's the wrong people who are reaching us in the wrong ways, but we want to be part of research. So to go back to that question, it's finding that mentor and surrounding yourself with other people who believe in your ideas, even if that first initial idea isn't quite formed. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time out of your mouth. It is merely a seed that you're planting that you can shape and collaborate with others. And I would say if there's something that draws your interest in particular, like I didn't necessarily make it as an archaeologist, even though I got my PhD in archaeology. I was able to translate that into something that still centered what interested me most, and that was history and the stories around history. And we just kind of worked with it until it became something.
That's
And
a
I would
great answer.
say one more thing is design something to interest the participants you're trying to reach, not the academic people who are not the institution.
Definitely. I guess as a follow-up to that, it would be, are there any specific skills or experience that you would recommend that people seek out if they're trying to get into this style of research?
Oh, the style of research. Um, I branched out and I joined the Oral History Association. And I tell you, when I went to that conference for the first time, and it's going to be in Portland this year, and we're developing a walking play. Um, that's going to be a next talk. When I joined that group, I felt like I had found my people. And so I would say, yes, I go to neurology conferences and Alzheimer's conferences, and I learn a lot and I find people who are interested in the work that I do and I'm interested in their work, but it was a different level of connection when I met with other oral historians. So I would say branch out. I would say if you don't find what you're interested in, if you don't see a lot of it reflected in the spaces you're in, look for the spaces where those are appreciated and reflected. And that's where you will meet people who will be thinking outside your assumptions maybe that you have because you're from a particular discipline, and that will open your mind to other ways of doing and collaborating.
Perfect. Thank you. So another question from the chat says, what motivating factors do you suggest for African American elders whose heritage includes generational behaviors or ancestral of not doing the activities, so like walking, which is forementioned in your studies, without them feeling some form of cognitive dissonance?
Yeah, that, your earlier questions and pushback is that people with wheelchairs, people who have less mobility, people who have to use canes, we allow canes, but a limited use of it because we're still
Mhm.
I mean, we've been piloting it for many years. We're still working with this, but we really want this to be something that everybody can access. And so we have adapted this to a sit down group. And it's like a 2 hour workshop where we have images on the large screen and at tables, and people turn their chairs to each other and reminisce and have these conversations. And then we have, old school Motown on, and we have someone doing some dance on stage, and people can chair dance or do light movements. And they're still doing some movement, but they, if they can't walk or aren't as mobile, they can still engage in this kind of physical reminiscence and social activity. And I am not wedded to the way Sharp is. I want people to adopt Sharp and adapt it. I think there are myriad ways we can take reminiscence, the things that work about this. Reminiscence on local Black history and culture, physical
Mhm.
activity, and social engagement. You take those three components, you rearrange them in however way serves the community that wants to use them.
Definitely. It's a great recipe. There's another question in the chat, which says, have you thought about doing this work in the rural South, particularly in areas in the South slash deep South?
Well, I don't spend a lot of time in the South. I just know I was very hot when I went there. Um, I hope so. I hope this gets to the South. But I'm not the one to do it there because I'm not from there. I am the one to guide, consult, but I really hope that somebody takes this on. Somebody reaches out and says, I want to start this in Mississippi, which is where my
Mhm.
family is from. I think it would be great to do something in Mississippi. I want to start this there, someone who has local knowledge, but even more so, someone who has deep and broad community ties so that we can bring the community together to ask them, how might this look in a way that would be attractive to you? Get people's buy-in around historical themes and people and places that they want to highlight, and get people's collaborative mind working together about how might this work in a way that fits us, that isn't intimidating to us, or that isn't doesn't feel like it's from somewhere else being applied to us superficially. Yeah, all this has to start with the community and what they want, and that's how we started.
Definitely. It definitely shows in the impact that you're having. I guess one final question, and then I will probably wrap up, but it would be around um, the fact that you kind of found a way to delve into neuro arts as well. And like the last part of your presentation was around, um, the performances that you're doing and taken directly from the research. So I wanted to ask a bit more about the plays, like are they available to view for the general public? Um, and like what is the audience, as in who's coming out to see these plays? And yeah, just a little bit more on that.
Not yet. They're not like recorded or online anywhere. Um, so who's coming to these? Folks who live in the gentrifying areas, who are gentrifiers. They're coming. Let me tell you, the research participants are definitely coming, and we reserve the first 2 rows for them. And to me, that was the most beautiful thing, was we kept our promise. That's what we're doing when we share these stories. we are keeping our promise that we're not collecting this treasure trove of stories to sit in our archives here at Oregon Health and Science University. That we are keeping these stories alive, and we're building upon these stories, hopefully for some for some social justice and action regarding gentrification and the ability for people to age in place. And so to see audience members, research participants recognize, oh, that's my story. I know who they're talking about there. Or, oh, wow, yeah, I remember when we talked about that. It was like a call and response. People were shouting up to us on the stage, and they were sharing their stories afterwards when we have a talk back about, people's reflections and, some of their memories. So my focus is primarily on delivering back to the research participants, but I do think it's important that a wide audience come, because if the people experiencing gentrification are the only ones talking about gentrification and reflecting upon it, there likely will not be any change or any growth in consciousness about people's roles in gentrification and how they contribute to the problems that down the road exacerbate our cognitive health.
Thank you so much, Dr. Croft. I think that's a salient and important point to end on. So we're going to stop there for today, but I'd firstly like to thank you for delivering a brilliant keynote on how you are empowering Black people to age healthily and also combat the effects of gentrification. I think your research is innovative, it's brilliant, and it's much needed. And I hope your work is adopted more widely and accepted a lot more. So thank you to everybody who has joined us, including the thoughtful questions and comments. Black in Neuro Week continues. The conversation will continue also on social media and into tomorrow, which is Neuro Across the Diaspora. So we'll be having a panel on building research capacity and networks across the diaspora. So be sure to check that out, and it'll be at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And happy Black in Neuro Week. We'll end there.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.